Welcome to Guitar Gavel, a place for people who love guitars. These are conversations with musicians, guitar enthusiasts, techs, and collectors about their guitar journey and their love of the instrument. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button, share with your friends, and be sure to sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Guitar Gavel podcast. I'm your host, David Still, and I am proud to have this week's guest, Kevin Dodds, who is the author of this book, Edward Van Halen, A Definitive Biography. So we're going to talk to Kevin about the book. We're going to talk to Kevin about his guitar journey, his musical background, which he has a pretty prolific one, having been a great guitarist. I'm going to call you great, even at an early age, because of this guy right here.
Yeah, and, for sure.
You're not an old guy, but you got a couple years under your belt, and so a great guitarist Kevin is. So we're going to talk about Kevin's guitar journey and how his love for Edward and for Van Halen led to this book in all things EVH in many ways, we could say. So that's it, Kevin. Thanks so much for your time. I'm so happy to have you on the show, man. Really appreciate
thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it.
Dude. And so we were talking offline as we were warming up the conversation with each other beforehand. We must start with, tell us about the room that you're in.
Sure.
What we've got going on, because
it's not a fake background. This is like a real physical background. I am a original frontline first generation Star Wars fan, right? I was 5 years old when the first movie came out, so you can do the math. And you know, the first toy line introduction in '78, you know, I was like, that was my 6th birthday, you know, like that's like real tender, awesome, fun, cool memories. And I had an older brother who was 3 years older than me. And we grew up playing Star Wars and Star Wars toys and, you know, all that stuff. And I lost my brother in '98 in a plane accident. And since then, I have recollected our, you know, original stuff from childhood, and then I have added to it over the last, you know, roughly 25 years or so. So this is a long time of collecting. I didn't just collect this stuff overnight. And, you know, so a lot of what you can actually see in here was like a birthday present or a Christmas present that I received, you know, when I was a child in the 70s and early 80s, late 70s, early 80s.
That's so awesome. How to make it full screen without any guitars in the way, so the audience can see.
Here's a little guitar here. Kind of goes around. And kind of comes around back the other way a little. So there we go.
And you do realize you have a lot of people's dream room right there. I'm sure others have told you.
Now that's a dangerous subject right there, because if I ever decided to do that, I could get into like model trains so big. I mean, I already have flirted with it a little bit. In fact, we were just talking about my brother. The last time I saw my brother was Christmas '97. And we got our old model train set out and we were playing with it, you know, as we were adults, you know, and that's what's a really fond memory of mine. So I love model train sets and things like that. So yeah, careful with so you're going to get that into my head.
I think this also, we should give a special thanks to Kevin's wife, the greatest wife on the planet, for allowing you to have this room.
Yeah, that was so funny. A friend of mine not too long ago said the same thing. In my den, which you can't see, I have 4 R2D2s, different ones, but I have R2D2 and then 3 other ones that I've 3D printed myself and made myself. But you know, they're amazing looking. But a buddy came over and he goes, "You realize no one else's wife would put up with this or whatever." I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, so I texted my wife. I'm like, "Hey, thank you. Apparently no one else's wife would put up with this." And she's like, "Oh, I'm cool that way."
That's awesome. That says everything, man. He's that laid back. That is great.
Right.
Well, Kevin, you know, a musical family you came from, and you talk about it in the book, and a big
Yeah.
influence on your dad. And I wanted to start there. Oftentimes I start with, tell us about your first guitar, and those influences, and that's all interwoven. And I will stop there. But why don't you start maybe with the influence from your dad? And
Yeah. So my dad was very musical. When I was born, he had a guitar, a folk guitar, and he played basic chords and sang, and he even played a few little riffy things, and he was he graduated high school, in 57, right? So just imagine the musical landscape right then and there. And when he was in high school, he was in a doo-wop band called the Heartthrobs. He lived in a town south of Dallas called Teague, and kind of east of Waco, but relatively close to Dallas. And they actually won a talent contest, and they got to go be on the Big D Jamboree radio show in Dallas, which was a national broadcast. And unfortunately, they didn't archive things back then. But he did perform on the national radio when he was just a teenager. I thought that was amazing. And somewhere along the way, both my brother and I, after exposure to Van Halen and Rush, especially, and all the other, typical classic rock bands, we developed an interest in learning the guitar. And so we went to a pawn shop that was very close to my dad's bank that he worked at the time. And I grew up in Houston, so everything down there, a lot of things down there are like space themed and stuff. So
right.
the pawn shop that I went to was called Space City Pawn. And they had a couple of used guitars there, nothing great. And I got, a $20, acoustic guitar. It was just a starter. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. It stayed in tune okay. That was, that's always a big issue if you're learning and playing. But I really progressed past it, and I desperately wanted to play electric guitar. And so we found just at that same pawn shop a really crappy Les Paul knockoff. I hesitate to even call it that because the guitar was like about that thin. It was more like SG thin, but the brand is hilarious. It was called a Laser, Lazer. I still have the remnants of that guitar. I've actually used a little bit of the bridge and other bits and pieces of it, but it was really just a piece of garbage. It didn't really stay in tune, and the action and intonation and stuff was just terrible. And so I fought and fought for another new guitar. And I got what was a Korean guitar at the time, was a Lotus brand guitar that was very much a Van Halen replica guitar, right down to black and white stripes, just like him, and a single humbucker, and a floating Rockinger tremolo. So it was basically a copycat of his guitar, and I was thrilled with it. I was in love with it, and it really played okay, and it really kind of stayed in tune pretty good. And I learned a lot on that guitar. I learned a lot. And I did my first real like public performance with my buddy in 7th grade with that guitar. But after like a year, I was like, I don't want a Korean off-brand plywood guitar. I want a Fender Strat. I've been playing for a couple of years now, like 3 years, and I want a real guitar. And so I strong-armed my parents into buying me a Fender Strat in 1985, and which I have right here. I've had that guitar for 38 years, so almost 40 years. The vast majority of my life, I've had this Fender Strat here. So,
all right, well, we'll see it.
Yeah, okay.
It's a special Strat.
Those are all my other guitars, but this is my first real guitar.
Oh yeah.
And it's a Japanese Strat, which was really the only ones that they made that year, as there was a lot of ownership changes and freaky things going on in the U.S. But this is the original bridge. It was a floating bridge, but it used to have a tune lock. It was back in the day when it had a tune lock behind the nut, and you can see where it was replaced like twice. So there's like two different sets of screw holes for a tune lock behind the nut, which was never really a great setup. And then eventually, over time, the fine tuners stripped, and so there was no more floating, no more nothing. So I just took all the fine tuners out. I just kind of anchored it, like a traditional drum, and put a graphite nut in it to help keep it in tune, and that just does the trick. So it is a very steady guitar. So one thing that I kind of thought was maybe a little cheap about it was maybe the electronics. The pickups were okay, but they definitely didn't sound like that real kind of awesome Strat sound, especially like over a little bit of time. And then I was like, I like kind of a humbucker sound as well. So eventually I got the pickups replaced. So there's a Hot Rails humbucker in the bridge. It's called a Chandler Hot Rail. That's like one of the rarest, humbucker bridge or pickups. I couldn't even find it on the internet these days. And then these are two Seymour Duncan. So I just got, the best kind of single coils you could get. And then I also changed the color scheme here. It used to be white, and I changed it to black. Just because I saw somebody that had a guitar with that color scheme, and I was just like, oh, that looks super cool. That's way cooler looking than white, So I changed it up just to kind of customize it a bit. So it really is like my guitar, and it even has scars from, being dropped and stuff. And, it's just, this is my go-to. Let's see if I can, you hear that all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a rush. This thing is great. It's a great lead instrument too. Yeah, you can like tread on it too. So it does everything.
Look, that's what that's a special. Hey, it's special because it's your first proper guitar. So personally, but historically, in modern day Fender history, right? They weren't manufacturing in America for about a year,
That's
maybe.
right in the middle of my rush to get one.
Yeah. But I mean, it's an inflection point in the history of Fender, and they're lucky that they had that relationship in
Yeah.
place, or they would have been fresh out of luck. So you've got,
Yeah, and I was recently at Austin Vintage Guitars, which is something I had talked to you about as well, and like almost this exact same guitar is hanging there, and it's got a decent value these days. It's a pretty respected, sought after guitar for sure.
it certainly is.
It's just unique,
What was the first Van Halen song that you learned?
Probably definitely You Really Got Me, that was the one that really jumped out at me, like excited me when I was a little kid. But when I say I learned You Really Got Me, I mean like going from, to which is not right, to which is not right, to which is right, So like I finally got his voicings and things like that over years and years and years. But there were certain parts of his playing that I just couldn't figure out. And there's really another amazing thing about learning Van Halen music, especially back then on my own, is a friend of mine that I went to high school with. We were high school friends. He was also a guitar player, very good guitar player. And he had just the insane level of hyper detailed knowledge about guitar parts and how, like, especially like back then, he was like crazy about Led Zeppelin and Clapton and stuff like that. This guy knew that stuff in and out, like a savant genius. But as an adult, he's actually become very well known and very well regarded for having really broken the code for how Eddie actually executed a lot of his parts and playing. And I had done similar things that he had done, but he just took it to the next level. So the way this actually happened, where we like relearned and reassessed all of Edward's parts and playing and things like that, was when that Guitar Hero game came out. All right. And they've separated all the tracks. And you had Eddie's guitar track isolated. And those made it to the internet, every song. And then you're like, oh my God, I've never really heard that bend there, or that dive there, or that hand shift, or whatever. And then you're like, oh, well, you put that into some software, you can slow it down, keep it at the same pitch these days, not like slowing tape down back in the day. You can slow it down and digitally keep it at the exact same pitch. And you could then, I was doing that too. And where I figured out like every note and phrasing, but I definitely did not have the right fingering. I was just like, here it's there, and I'm, very difficult playing something here. And then things had been transcribed in magazines and music books incorrectly for years. My buddy, literally within the last 2 years, had the actual note perfect version of Eruption published in Guitar Player. His name is Alan Garber. And he actually just did a podcast with Dweezil Zappa just the other day, like a few weeks ago, about Eddie's playing. And he's broken down not just Eruption, but things like the Beat It guitar solo, the Jump guitar solo, things that are almost mystical, like how in the world did he play that? How was his tuning? And my buddy also influenced me, this guy Alan, influenced me to get one of these, this Peterson strobe tuner, because a lot of people don't realize this, but Eddie tuned offset tuning because he played a lot of thirds on the G and the B string. So he had to flatten his B string a little to keep that third from being too sharp, because it's just naturally sharp. That's the way a guitar is built. And so this guy figured out every little tweaking of the tuning, and he has like the tuning down to this like megahertz, numbers for each string for like each track. And then he also got a 1975 Ibanez, just like the one that Eddie used to record Van Halen 1. And he brought that thing over with the offset tunings. It's the same guitar that's used to record Running with the Devil. And I played Running with the Devil my whole life, a million times. But when I held that 75 Explorer in my hand and it was tuned to those offsets, I couldn't even believe how it made me feel when I played it. I was like, wow. I was like entering into like just this alternate universe just for a moment, because it is exactly like it. There's no difference in the sound. Like you play it, and you're like, that's exactly the way it sounds, and that's the way it feels. It was amazing, and I just like thanked him just for that experience. So,
wow,
that's Alan Garber. Alan Garber, if you want to look this guy up. And amazingly, we went to high school together, and I thought that there were two of us at every high school. I thought that everywhere there were two crazy Eddie Van Halen fans in every high school. But apparently we were special nerds. So we've dedicated a lot of time in our adult lives to the study of Eddie Van Halen.
Well, I'm curious, when he cracked the code on not only Eruption, but other songs, and you're working on it. I mean, your muscle memory, was it a challenge to, I'm assuming
you don't even know.
Yeah.
Playing things wrong for 15, 20, 30 years. And you're like, I have to relearn that now. You have to blank out your brain and start completely over. And it is a real challenge. And that's actually kind of what I think Alan has found frustrating with a lot of people. they, they're like, oh, I've played it this way long enough. It's close enough. Eddie wouldn't be able to tell them. They say stuff like that. And he and I are of this opinion that you don't screw around with like Mozart's music. You don't screw around with Bach's music. And if you're going to present Eddie's music, then you should do it in the most accurate, faithful way possible. And if you can't, or if you're not going to, then go and do like a country music version of a Van Halen song rather than a kind of a sloppy, inaccurate version of it, which we've seen a lot of on the internet, unfortunately, and stuff. So, I wish, and he wishes that people would stop, settle down, listen and watch his picking patterns and the fingering and the hand shifts and stuff like that. And then people would go, oh, I get it now. That's how it's done. Rather than they're just ham-fisted. I've done it this way, forever, and I'm just going to do it this way. But he really did. There was this one lick and eruption that, and I can show you once I get to Van Halen guitars or whatever. But one lick and eruption, a very famous lick and eruption. I am telling you, no one played it correctly for the last since '78. No one played that one lick just right. My buddy figured it out. And then once he figured it out and I relearned it, and I was like, hey, I learned it. I got it right now. And he's like, yeah, isn't it easier that way than the wrong way that we've been playing it forever? I was like, yeah, the wrong way is like, yeah, dude, crazy stuff like this. I'm like, the right way is like, it just flows. And like no one could figure out, the notes are so weird. His fingering is so legato and so fast, picking every note that it just got lost on people how he actually did that. But man, when he showed me, he figured it out and I started playing it right. I'm like, oh man, it just feels so good to play that accurately and to hear that. And when I play it, performances and stuff occasionally when I was in a cover band and things like that, people get a big kick out of it. And you always see when I go to that one part that's really fast and all people have always played it wrong. And when I play it correctly, because my buddy Alan taught me how to play it correctly, you just see people go, whoa, it's like, but to me, it's just like, well, if you practice any lick, like for a few hours, if you play guitar forever, you should be able to nail that lick. So for me, once you do it, it is actually just a flow, like legato thing, and it's not impossible. But I thank him a lot for actually upping my. Now I was always very interested in Eddie the person because he influenced me as a human being. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to look like him. I wanted to dress like him. I wanted to talk like him. I wanted to walk like him. I wanted to invent my own guitars. I wanted to paint my own guitars. I wanted to be in a rock band and I wanted to be the lead guitar player that took tapping lead breaks and stuff. He influenced me as a person, so I was always very interested in the biographical aspect of him as well. So Alan and I kind of split the difference on that where, I'm very interested in his life growing up and emigrating to America and, when Van Halen first broke and his marriage and his son and his relationship with David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar and all that stuff. And Alan's like, hey, I know the offset tunings to every song on Fair Warning, and I know how to play it. And I'm like, yeah. Well, we kind of like got two heads and it's pretty fun.
That's really cool. Which takes us back to kind of childhood, your infatuation, fascination, your fandom for Van Halen and Eddie. And I do want to clarify one thing in the book. You refer to Edward as Edward. The rest the world refers to him as Eddie or EVH.
Yeah.
I mean, because we've got the brand, it's easier to say EVH. But being proper is. Did Edward's friends refer to him as Edward, or was that just to be respectful of his full name? I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. It's the name of the biography. I wanted to have his full, formal name as the name. and I do call him Edward a lot, and people did call him Edward for sure. But if you look, I kind of rotate Ed, Eddie, and Edward, just so it's not like the same thing over and over, just to have some word variation. Some people called him Ed, and that was it. Some people called him Edward. I think like David Lee Roth definitely called him Edward. And I think the general fan base called him Eddie.
Yeah. Well, how did you, so going back then, late 70s, 80s, just kind of your first foray, which you've described a little bit, but when were you just totally, when did you totally become obsessed with
Yeah. So
in a
yeah,
proper nice
my
way?
grandmother was pretty cool. My dad's mom, she did something really neat. Between her house, she actually lived practically right in downtown Houston. I mean, like, not a great neighborhood, but she refused to move because it was her house, damn it. But between her house and our house out in the suburbs near NASA, there was a sound warehouse. And for Christmas and for our birthdays, my grandmother would just stop off at Sound Warehouse and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and just grabbed all 40 of the top 40 45s. And they were a quarter each or whatever. So they cost her, it was $10 for her to give my brother and I 40 45s.
Wow.
And she did that a lot. And so until my brother and I had 45s, just stacks of them. And we even, the ones that we didn't like, we would like break them and stuff. We were little kids, right? We were little kids. And so like for my 7th birthday, in April of 79, grandmother shows up with a stack of 45s, and in the middle of them, somewhere in the middle, was Dance the Night Away by Van Halen. That was it just come out as a single, right in time for my birthday. And I really liked it. The funny thing was I was so young still. I used to identify the band and the artist by what the 45 looked like. So Van Halen was on Warner Brothers. Well, I had Christopher Cross 45s and stuff too, and he was on Warner Brothers. So the 45s looked the same. I remember I was confused. I was like, is it the same? Christopher Cross? Is that Van Halen? And then I remember being for sure that Van Halen was a guy's name, and it was the lead singer. And I'm not the only one that thought that. And David Lee Roth said that people would call him Van all the time. And I literally thought the singer, because that's the way I was a little kid. It was always the singer. There was more singers than band names for me for the pop stuff,
Right.
And so I just assumed Van Halen was the singer's name. His name was Van Halen, and I just always loved that, and I held on to that. A few years later, a couple movies came out. There was Over the Edge, which was a really bleak, dark, suburban melodrama about these juvenile delinquents in a neighborhood in the suburbs where they built all the stuff for the adults, but they didn't do anything for the kids. And so the kids had nothing to do. And so they were wayward and doing drugs and getting into fights and stuff like that. But the soundtrack to that movie was amazing. Had Cheap Trick and the Cars and Van Halen. And I mean, everybody, all the late 70s rockers. And there's a party scene that had You Really Got Me in it. And, it was definitely dark. And so I kind of associated it with kind of a other world of like kind of bad kids and bad teenagers and stuff like that. But I was really fascinated with the song just to hear it in the and I wasn't, I was so young, I wasn't aware of the Kinks version or whatever. And then that movie Night Shift with Henry Winkler and Michael Keaton came out, I think in 82, early 82, maybe 81. It also had You Really Got Me in a party sequence. But that party sequence was a lot of fun. It looked like everybody was having a blast, and You Really Got Me was just cranked, all through the whole party sequence. And that was a real blast. But what really did it was when Pretty Woman came out. That was the very early 82. And we were listening to it in my brother's room, rocking out. I may have known that it was a cover, but I didn't really understand the extent to which Roy Orbison had already had a huge hit with it. But we were rocking out to it in my brother's room. I was 10, my brother was 13, and my dad walked by. And I'll never forget, he just goes, "Hell, that's my music," with a smile on his face. And he's like, "What is this?" And we're like, "Oh, this is Van Halen. They did Pretty Woman." And he goes, "Oh, okay, well, that's great," or whatever. My brother and I were like, "Whoa, even Dad kind of likes this." So we were like, "Okay, that's cool." So, then Diver Down came out, and then it was just this matter of going back and getting all the other albums up to that point. And then when 1984 came out, it just hit us right between the eyes, and we were able to go to that show and see them live in 1984 at their absolute peak, which was really life-changing.
Now that was the show that did you in,
Yeah.
for better or worse.
Yeah. That made my buddy and I that I went to the show with start a band right then and there when we were 12 years old. And we continued it and still continue it in a way. But we really tried to be a real band like in the 90s. And we got decently far locally in Austin and Texas. But we saw that we were cresting and that we weren't going to be, Pearl Jam or, Nirvana or Soundgarden or anybody big, Rage Against the Machine. We were just going to be some local rock band, and that was fine. So we kind of put it in a state of suspended animation. So we kind of like retired from it, and then every once in a while we come out and have reunion shows. And so technically we kind of pulled a fast one on everyone. And we were like, well, we quit, but we instead of shutting the door, we more like rolled a ball that's like is in perpetual motion at the same thing. We just play the same songs, and but it's fun because we worked pretty hard at it in the 90s, and we still have a pretty loyal fan base. So even though they're our age now, everybody has kids now, they'll still come out when we play every once in a while, which is fun.
Speaking of kids, because as important as Edward was in your life and the guitar, you have passed on the guitar, and I'm assuming Van Halen as well
Yeah,
to your sons.
sure.
But hey, you know how it is with kids; you can't force anything on them. So they but presumably, tell us a little bit about that, because that's got to be a really unique experience. And I'll tell you what, with as a dad to a 6 and a 9-year-old, try to get my daughter to play, and it's fine. It's her timeline. She may never play. You know how this goes. But you have successfully gotten them interested in playing, and it sounds to me like they're really good players too. How did you manage to do that? And I'm sure you're super proud of them.
Yeah, I won't lie. I forced it on them right from the day they were born. When they were little kids, I'm like,
Yeah.
hold this ukulele and hold it like that, and do like that, just and I even have a picture of my oldest son when he was, geez, 3 or something like that, with my Strat on him like this big, and he's like on the crybaby pedal while I'm rocking the crybaby pedal. But he didn't really take off until he was like 6. But I mean, I say 6. I didn't start until I was 10. But I got him a little mini Squire Strat, and he was blown away by the School of Rock movie. And so his first thing, he woke up the next morning going, "Da-na, playing Highway to Hell," and he just learned it. And I was like, holy crap, dude, like you just learned your first song like overnight without me even, I mean, that's wild. Well, Evan really started taking off. By the time he was 12, he was playing Van Halen songs masterfully. And he still plays, and he's a brilliant player. I just hear him in his room, and when he's fluid, man, he is like, he doesn't even know it, but I mean, he sounds almost like Jeff Beck or Yngwie Malmsteen or Richie Blackmore or something. Just because he's just shredding, and flowing and doing interesting fingering and stuff like that. And And I just kind of walk by these days and I'm like, he's 20 now. And I'm just like, hey man, you're really in the zone. And he goes, yeah, I get this way like once a week. So my other son, he's 15 now. He was way slower to pick it up. It was interesting. I used to always try to force it on him, and I bought him a ukulele, and we painted it like Van Halen stripes, and I put his Owen on it, and I here, and he just does his own thing. Well, he got interested in me customizing the guitars and things like that, and he asked if he could take one of the guitars and paint it his own way. After he could paint some design on it, and I was like, fine, go ahead. It's just paint. If I ever wanted to, or you ever wanted to, we just paint over it or whatever. So yeah, go ahead. So he painted some weird design on this guitar. Next couple of days, he's playing the guitar. He's learning little bits, and I'll never forget. I was like, wow, okay, that's what it took. I had to let him do his own thing to the guitar physically, and then he walked into the room, and he is less about Van Halen and shredding. He is way more like a Nirvana kind of style, Kurt Cobain style player, which is great with me. I love Kurt Cobain and Nirvana as much as Van Halen and Rush and anything else. Like my older son, between the three of us, we're probably just the biggest Nirvana fans in the city of Austin for sure. I know that. We just admire that guy's artistry like crazy, and don't admire what he did to his life or how he acted in his life, how he ended his life. But his music, creativity, originality, songwriting, vocals, lyrics. I mean, Kurt Cobain was an absolute genius, So we all play it. I play Nirvana songs. My older son certainly does. His original music sounded pretty Nirvana-ish. And my younger son just plays Nirvana all day. And we had an opportunity recently to play at a charity thing with a friend of mine that I used to be in a band with. And he was getting everybody back together, if you will, and asked if I wanted to do anything special. And he said, maybe with your kids or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, you never know. So I asked them hesitantly, I'm like, hey, would you guys want to play with me and my buddy? We could do like some Nirvana songs. And they were like, yeah, sure. So I was like, oh, wow, okay, they really do want to do it, So we picked 2 songs, and basically each of them sang, and I played the bass. So I kind of switched over to the bass so that they could both play the guitar parts and sing. And they both just killed it. And it all sounded great. But the thing really was when they would step up to sing and start scream singing, and people were just like, whoa, like where did you come with that? That was a lot of fun, and it went really well. And it got taped and put on Facebook and stuff like that. And, everyone's like, when are you guys playing again? Are you guys going to do that again? Are you guys going to make your own band? I'm kind of like, oh boy, I don't know how my kids ultimately would feel about all that, but it turns out that they do have like a mild interest in it. And we've been asked to do some other gigs. So we have a couple of other gigs coming up. We're probably going to do the same kind of set of Nirvana songs. But we're also interested in writing some stuff and maybe recording some stuff and maybe getting a few gigs and seeing how it goes. Because, there's this whole bridging the generational gap there thing. My youngest son's 15, and I'm 51, and we all love the same music, I think there is something a little special there. But that performance that we did, we played Breed and Aneurysm by Nirvana, and it could be on YouTube somewhere. It was pretty special. It was definitely pretty special. And yeah, they're both really talented.
That sounds special. You did something right. Well done, Dad.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard a lot of that from the older guys.
I bet you did. Yeah, that's what
I had some guys corner me, and go, "Hey, man, you guys got original material?" I'm like, "Not yet, not really." He goes, "You need to get in that. You need to do that." He goes, "Your youngest son, his voice, man, you need to get that on some tape." And I'm like, okay, man, okay. So some guys really had strong reactions.
I can imagine. That would be me a
Yeah,
couple
yeah.
of beers, y'all play. I'm like, hey man, Kevin, I'm David. It's nice to meet you. Let me tell you about your son.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's like having a horse and just entering into a race and it wins, and you're like, yeah, it was just the one race, and people are like, no, 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 we want to see that horse race over and over and over and over. So
That's
so it's kind of like that. It's kind of funny.
well. Let's dive into the book a little bit.
Sure,
I know I'm bouncing all over the place, but I
it's okay.
definitely want to go here. And thanks for letting me guide you a gazillion different directions. Why the book? Why you? And for those that are unfamiliar with the book, it is minus the reference section, and we're about 390 pages. Like it's a comprehensive, as it says, definitive biography.
Yep.
And you write in the book why you wrote the book, but share with us, because I'm sure it's a little deeper than what's on the paper there.
Yeah. And it is definitive as of like 2012. So there's been 10 years, in the interim. Granted, not a whole lot happened in that 10 years. I would probably reflect on the 10 years and his death in a chapter or two, additional chapter or two. So you get from way before his birth to 2012, which was a long way into his career. So what happened was I told you about how my band, we kind of semi-retired, if you will. That's another word that we like to use for it, semi-retired. We were semi-professional, so we semi-retired. When that kind of, we put the brakes on that, and it wasn't taking up 60% of my free time, I suddenly had a lot of time, and I felt a void, and I was like, how did I even get into all this? Like I know, well, my dad, was a musician and stuff and taught me my first song on guitar, but I'm like, no, really, really, what is this? What is rock and roll? What is rock music? What is the history of this? And what's the deal with the guitar and the electric guitar? Like, I never really truly philosophically, culturally reflected on what that meant and why it meant what it meant, how that even happened. I mean, you got to think about it. It's like for a while there, groups of like 3, 4, 5 guys and their electric guitars were ruling the culture like sports heroes. I mean, we had their posters bigger than life, as big as life, on our walls that we looked at every single day. And if you look at that, I can imagine someone very detached from another era would go, wow, what is the fascination with these teenagers and these men and occasionally back then women that play these guitars and rock out and play rock and roll music? And so I just got really reflective on it. And so I was like, I'm going to the bookstore. So I went to the bookstore. I kind of went to the music section, and I saw the fattest book I could find, and it was literally called The History of Rock and Roll by Rolling Stone. And it was just what I was looking for, because it started at like 1860. I'm like, that's what I was looking for. I wanted to know all the way back why New Orleans and that little part of the South became the birthplace of jazz. And it was because at the end of the Civil War, all the surplus jazz, marching band, military instruments ended up in a surplus warehouse in New Orleans. And so there was a common thing to have massive amounts of brass instruments around, stockpiled over what they're more than they could use. So they basically gave them to people. And that started this fascination with brass and brass music. Over many years, that evolved into a familiar rhythm, almost like that bump, 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 that kind of, I don't know, third, things that are in thirds kind of thing, that rolling kind of rhythm that you hear when you go to New Orleans. It's just like every brass tuba, it goes boom, 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 boom. It's like that. It's that rhythm, right? And then, people are like, things start to get electrified, and they start to use microphones to amplify things so they can play to bigger crowds. And those microphones naturally distort a little, you know, and so it doesn't sound like a human voice. Sounds like a voice with an effect on it, or a trombone or a trumpet would sound a little distorted and harsh. And people are like, "Ooh, yeah." There's just something about the actual sound that makes your inner ear or whatever that is makes it go, "Wow, what is that? That sounds so cool," you know. And then became, well, what about the electric guitar, you know? And so then the electric guitar started poking through, and that got associated with the blues, you know, in that same region, you know, just a little there up north to Tennessee and Memphis, and you know, all right there in that one little zone though. And then, you know, it took somebody like Elvis to synthesize all that. And I mean, that guy was a vessel, you know. I can't even describe how important he is. That is beyond, you can't overstate how important Elvis Presley was. And so I got all the way through the book. It got up through the modern era. You know, I think the book came out in early 80s or something like that. So it got up to about the 80s. And man, and then when I was done with it, I was like, man, I want to read that again or something. And I was like, well, no, let me find, I want to know more about Elvis. So then I started reading books about Elvis. And if you want to do that, boy, you can do that for a long time. There's a lot of books about Elvis. But I became really interested in the ones written by his inner circle friends. Those are the best ones. And then, you know, I got fascinated with Jimi Hendrix. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to read everything there is to read about Jimi Hendrix. And when I was younger, I'd already read everything you could read about the Beatles, you know. And so, like, I just consumed this stuff. And then I just started reading anything I could find. I mean, I would just go to the bookstore, be like, music section. I'm like, the drummer for Aerosmith has a book? Sure. Let me check it out. You know, anybody's book. You know, the bass player for Ozzy had a book. I mean, just anybody that had a book. The Don Felder's book, you know, his story about the Eagles, on and on and on. A whole bookshelves of just all these books. Finally, I kind of got to a point where I was like, where's the one on Eddie Van Halen? Why is there not a book on Eddie Van Halen? I mean, that is crazy. I was like, that is crazy. He is literally at least the second most influential guitarist that ever lived, if not the first. And Jimi Hendrix had 25 books on him that I could read. Elvis had 60 books I could read. And I'm like, there's not one book on Eddie Van Halen? I'm like, that is ridiculous. And so I just started saying that to my friends. Can you believe that? There's no book on Eddie Van Halen? I mean, that's wrong, you know? And I said it so many times, people are like, finally, one friend of mine, he said, well, why don't you write it? And I said, well, how can I do that? I'm like, he goes, well, talk to our friend Larry. He self-published his own book, I think. And I was like, okay. So I talked to my buddy. I'm like, so I heard you self-published that book, right? I'm like, how'd that work? And he goes, oh, it's this company. You submit your manuscript and stuff, and you know, you pay them. But then, you know, when the book comes out, they make it available on Amazon and they print copies of it. You have a hard copy of it right there. It's like a print on demand thing. So they don't print a million books and hope they sell. They print on demand. You know, it's a very effective, efficient service. Well, I bought into it and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I did start a contract with that company, and I took about a year. And I just read and watched and listened to every ounce of available material that existed in the world on Eddie, and even stuff that people weren't supposed to hear. There was at one point I came across the audio of an interview tape that was stolen, and he said some very frank things that he even said, if you ever tell anybody I said this, I'm going to come up to your house and blow you away. But it happened in, you know, 81 or 80. The interview was like from 81, 82. So it was kind of ancient history, but it was interesting that 30 something years on, you were like, oh, that's really how he felt at the time when he was talking and he didn't think anybody was listening or anybody, whatever. So it was very revealing, right? And so I contacted the guy, and what I did was I I transcribed every word of it. And I said, hey, here's a transcript of that interview. And I'm like, would you mind if I used it? And he's like, yeah, you can use it. So it was like a bell that couldn't be unrung. The tape had already gotten out. So I was able to use every concert audio and video that I could find. I mean, every single one.
Wow.
I mean, from everyone in order. There's no weird, unless there's some recent footage that's like just recently discovered, like 1984 footage from Donington, England, that no one had seen, since 1984. That was brand new. I had never seen that the other day. But everything else that existed, every magazine article, every newspaper article in every city, I had access to a database of news articles from Wall Street Journal archives. And they had magazines from, the Milwaukee Journal and the Houston Chronicle. And every time something happened. So I was just assembling this massive sequential bit of information, just every step along the way. And then I just started circling things, finding themes, and then I figured out there's like 4 or 5 themes to his life, and concentrated on those, and finally just assembled it. And I'm not a stranger to writing. I'm not a stranger to editing, and I wasn't a stranger to book publishing. I worked for a book publishing company. It was an academic publishing company, but the mechanics are the same. I managed writers. I managed copy editors. I had actually been employed as a writer of business profiles, like one of my first jobs out of college, and I got all my writing training through college. So that's why I could even say, okay, well, I guess I could write my own book, because I was so familiar with the publishing process. So I wasn't just a guy that was just like, well, let me just see what I can do. I kind of had aim and intent, for what I wanted. Then when I finished it, and I was happy with it. I'm satisfied with it. I thought, man, if I can get this for sale on the Van Halen store website, they have like the official merchandise site, I'm like, that would just be such a home run. So I contacted that guy and I sent him the book. And a couple of days later, he's like, I love it. I'm going to buy a bunch of copies and sell it. And I was like, wow. And that was before it even came out. So when it came out, it was this whole Eddie Van Halen biography on the official Van Halen web store site. I couldn't even imagine that would happen, but thank God he liked it, and it was worth a damn, and so he did that. And so I got a lot of attention that way, found my way to the hardcore Van Halen audience. And, I would estimate that the book has sold as many copies as, any rock biography, to be honest, over the last 10 years, because it's something that people seek out. They become fascinated with Eddie. They get exposed to Eddie. They hear the Jump song on the Applebee's commercial, and they're like, who is that? And then they're like, I want to know more about that guy. And so they go to Amazon and they type in Eddie Van Halen, and my book is like the first thing that pops up. And so it's something that people seek out, and I don't have to really like promote it a lot anymore. I did go through a period, obviously. If you make a book, you have to promote it and market it. But now it just kind of is a destination item that people seek out. Ultimately, I think every real Van Halen fan, that has the collection of a half a dozen books that have been written about them, my book's going to be in there with theirs. So.
A true labor of love. I mean, and your reference list is extensive, and you described it just then.
Yeah, I included every reference too. There are 1,000 something that I included, and you can imagine I eschewed another 2,000. I had so much reference material. It just was like looking through a flip graph, or flip movie of his whole life. Just like he just like went like there's his whole life. It was pretty wild.
When you said you worked on it, or you were researching it for a year, what was when you sat down to write, how long did that take? And were you doing this full time at the time?
No, I was working full time, but I dedicated every single lunch hour to it, every single lunch hour for months. I would go to this one particular barbecue joint and just sit in the back, and I had my stack. So a lot of my edited pages and stuff have barbecue sauce on them and stuff. Yeah, and then I did it in the evenings and on the weekends.
Yeah.
It was just kind of a nonstop thing. It was a little obsessive, a little OCD for sure at the time. And to be honest, I'm a little separated from it at this point, where I don't live and breathe him and his playing like I did for various windows of my life. I'm still, of course, fascinated with him, and not a week or a couple of days goes by that somebody doesn't text me something, some performance, some picture, something. I had never seen this before, and I'm like, yeah, that was when he played with Brian May, blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, I've seen that. A lot of even hardcore fans, man, I'd never seen this. I'm like, yeah, that was back 1975 at Pasadena High School. They played "Man on the Silver Mountain," by Rainbow. It was great. I've heard it. I think I even learned it Eddie's way. But yeah, no, I just got so crazy OCD with it. And to be honest, I do kind of have manic kind of OCD a little, I guess, but it makes me get the things that I'm into, I get really into. I'm not a mile wide and an inch deep. I'm an inch wide and a mile deep. I mean, I'm like, whatever I like to the nth degree. Star Wars, the Texas Longhorns football team, basketball team, Rush, Van Halen, my interest, 3D printing, like my interest, like I don't mess around. I'm like, I don't just lightly get into things. When I get into things, I get in all the way. When I get into 3D printing, I was like, boy, one printer's not enough. So I got 3 now, when I want to print something big, I don't want to wait, like a week for it. I want 3 printers running at the same time. But when I get into stuff, I really get into it. So that is partially the benefit of, why I was able to even have the time and ability to concentrate and gather enough facts. It's just because I was so obsessed with it. And sometimes I can feel the lure of getting back into it and learning new things and relearning new things. Especially my buddy Alan is always sending me, like I said, he recently uncoded the Be It guitar solo and the Jump guitar solo that are really quite mysterious solos, to be honest. Almost no one that has played those solos played them correctly, period, besides Eddie Van Halen and my buddy who has been able to decode that. And I want to get back into that and learn that, but I also feel this lure of, I'm a little out of that world at the moment, and if I'm kind of got other things going on, and if I let that kind of creep back in, it'll eat up my time, and I know it'll happen. One of my sons will be like, hey, I need you to teach me, center swing, or something like that, and I'll be like, okay, let's sit down and we'll go over it, and I'll get back into it, and I'll have to relearn my stuff, and musically, I have like other interests a little. I mean, I'm really that big music historian guy. I love the serious decades channels. Like that's all I listen to. I just go 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I just go back and forth between those and the Ozzy's Boneyard to get like the basic metal stuff. But I even like pop and pop music and stuff. And a lot of people are surprised sometimes that I like Metallica and Slayer and stuff, and I can also really appreciate the Bee Gees and even like NSYNC and stuff like that, and even Taylor Swift, and I admire her. I think I don't own any of her albums, but a lot of the pop. Occasionally, I hear some pop thing, and I'm like, man, that is a great melody, and I'm like, it sounds like if I was in a dance club, which I'll never find myself in, people would really be reacting to that, and I appreciate that. I like that. So I kind of like all music, and actually, my sons and I, since we did this thing that we're playing, we've actually done this thing where we're dissecting things that we like about songs. And like we hear a song, and we like, I don't know why, but I like that chord change. I love the way that sounds. I don't know what that is, but let's figure that out when we get home. And then I'm like, oh, I know what it is. It's that he drops to the third, but he still hits the like seventh, the sharp seventh or something like that. And it just sounds weird, sounds cool. And then we're like, oh, well, then we started doing things like, well, hey, we should keep that in mind, and like, so we start to stockpile these little ideas. Like we heard was Paul McCartney, No More Lonely Nights. Like it has a false ending. I love false endings, like Suspicious Minds and the songs that fade out, or there's a and then there's a whole other part to go. I love false endings. I just love false endings. No More Lonely Nights has like a false ending where it breaks way down and it sounds like the keyboard's just about to stop. And then it just goes into this whole other part where David Gilmour plays this, like, it just sounds like Pink Floyd, basically. David Gilmour plays a guitar solo. And, we're just like, hey, false ending. That's a good idea, And then we're like, hey, most good choruses really kind of go 1-4-5, some combination of 1-4-5, 1-5-4, whatever, and we're like, that's not ripping somebody off. That's not not being original. I'm like, literally, listen. When we listen to the radio, I'm like, almost every chorus that's in a major key, chorus, some combination of 1-4-5. Like that's just what people like to hear when the chorus hits off. So we're like, yeah, keep that in mind too. So we're like kind of in this mode now where we're like, what makes that song good? What is that? And we want to start dissecting it, kind of like bringing all these ideas, to the table when we start to write stuff. Because a friend of mine said something really profound recently. And if anybody out there is listening, you might, if you're like a Led Zeppelin fan or whatever, you might really appreciate this. But I was talking about this with my buddy, and same thing. He's a great songwriter. I'm a guy I'm in a side band with, my buddy Sam. And I was saying stuff like that to him. Hey, I love that Rick Springfield song, that middle eight. I'm like, what is up with that middle eight? What are those chords? And how the hell did Rick Springfield come up with something so good? And then he was like, yeah, when I started writing songs, I remember I figured one thing out is like, every chorus always repeats the main line twice. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, well, he goes, well, not every song, but it's a common technique. And it kind of drives home the whole theme of the song. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll remember that too. So it's funny that to talk to other people that have kind of done this, where they like kind of break things down, and they're like, but anyways, what I was going to say was, he told me, my buddy Sam said, Jeff Beck, his first two albums were basically the blueprint for Led Zeppelin. Like that's what the first two Led Zeppelin albums sound like. They sound like what Jeff Beck did in like 67, or early 68. But everyone likes Led Zeppelin. And he said, I love Jimmy Page as a guitar player, and he knows I do too. We both also know that he's not an Eddie Van Halen. He's not anywhere close to Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck, as a physical guitar player, can play circles around Jimmy Page. Everybody knows that. Jimmy Page can be in the zone, and when he was in the zone, Stairway to Heaven solo is probably one of the greatest lead guitar solos ever recorded by a human being. I appreciate that. But he said, hey, you know what the thing is? Jimmy Page's songs were better than Jeff Beck's songs. That's why everybody knows Led Zeppelin. It's not because Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck had a guitar playing contest, and and I was like really astounded by that. I was like, damn, dude, that is really heavy. I'm like, that kind of makes you question all those hours and hours and hours of, every little note that I learned when, I was doing all that. And out of nowhere comes, I mean, the simplest thing ever. What is the guitar solo? It's the melody of the, it's not, that's not the solo to Smells Like Teen Spirit. because the melody, the song, the arrangement is so compelling that it doesn't even matter if the execution of the guitar is brilliant and million miles an hour. I mean, that was another thing that just blew my mind was when Nirvana came out, it was like, damn, you know, all this shredding and stuff, it just doesn't really mean anything, you know. And it was weird because I was such an Eddie Van Halen freak and I spent all my time in the bedroom learning how to shred. And then all of a sudden it was like, smack, you know, I was like, wrong. Yeah. To the point that when, you know, my band, my legacy band, high school band, we moved to Austin to all go to University of Texas together. And we went through so many early 90s phases before we finally established like a style and an act that we could appreciate. But the funniest thing was we basically dialed ourselves back from being like Rush, progressive rock, Metallica, you know, ability to songs that sounded like, you know, like that's the whole riff of the song. And then the bass just goes, you know, whatever. Like we were doing the simplest building block children's toy music that we could possibly do. And that is actually how we got traction and we were able to be a relatively successful band in the 90s in Austin, was we kept the song simple. And then we allowed ourselves to evolve. So we evolved and we started doing stuff that was like, whoa, those guys can really play. We were really shredding and stuff, but we had our own style that we did it in. It didn't, you know, we had this like funky blues, grungy kind of a thing going on, Austin kind of a thing going on. And we had two guitars and sometimes we did some co-lead guitar stuff, you know, that kind of impressed people. But the whole reason we could do that is because we dialed it back down to zero and was like, dude, you have to have songs that the common person can wrap their minds around, or that has an earworm that gets stuck in someone's head, a good catchy melody, a good hooky lyric. You know, once we learned that, you know, we were actually able to find some success. Whereas I was like, I think that before I was like, I think that a song should have no less than 12 parts, you know, and should change keys and tempos at least 3 times, you know, and it was just so ridiculously stupid thought processes, you know, that, yeah, it took me a little while to shake that. But then I finally did. And I was like, cool, I can play simple stuff now, you know. And another thing too, lyrically, I don't even know what I was writing. Stupid, crazy, dramatic, early 20-year-old, self-reflective bull crap. And I remember I heard Nirvana, the song, it's called Sliver, but the chorus just goes, Grandma, take me home, Grandma, take me home. It's a song from a little kid's perspective. And he's like, you know, I had to eat my dinner there, mashed potatoes and stuff like that. I couldn't chew my meat real good. Grandma, take me home. And it's, you know, it's like really heavy, but it's from like a little kid's perspective. And I was like, oh man, that's really cool. So I started writing a lot of lyrics like that from like the perspective of being a little kid in like the 70s and stuff. And I was like, oh man, now I can write about anything. You know, like climbing up a front yard tree. I thought that was like one of my best lyrics or whatever. I was like, because that's just something that everybody can identify with, climbing up a tree in the front yard. You know, like I don't have to write crazy esoteric poetry, psychedelic, bizarre. Just present people with interesting phrases and things that they can latch onto. You know, it was a big learning experience, but I'm glad that we went through
it. Not being a professional or semi or quarter professional musician, as you evolve as a musician, as your skills grow, your musical ability grows, there can be a need to try to share that, but it does come back to who's the end user, your audience, who's the listener, and they can't process. Not many of them can process what you're presenting to them. you got to keep it for the regular people, and
For sure.
it's the way it went. Well, you're while you're standing there next to some guitars.
I'm gonna grab this one here.
Yeah. I'm going to make you full screen because we've got to talk about these.
Okay, yeah. So inevitably, I got into this replica community. There's a lot of people out there that just like I kind of am with Star Wars 3D printing stuff, making R2D2. There are Facebook groups and message board communities where people share information and they share their creations and stuff like that. So I kind of fell into this group of people that make Van Halen replica guitars, like painstakingly accurate, and so I made a couple, and I just scrapped together from various instruments. This one actually is like, it's kind of a custom ordered, custom made for sure, but custom ordered. That it is basically a replica. Some guy, a company, Musicraft, a great company, made the body and made the neck, and they made them like to the exact specs of the original guitars that Kramer made for Eddie in 83, 84. And so I got this, a basswood body, just like the original 5150, maple neck, no finish on it whatsoever. I mean, even right down to the water slide is like the exact size, the exact version of that Kramer sticker. Got the holographic stars, the 5150 stickers. They're like the exact ones. Some guy even hooked me up with some 5150 picks and some DH picks and stuff like that. An MXR pedal knob for the volume, just like him. Seymour Duncan, 59, just like him. A Floyd Rose. And so this is like my, kind of go-to Van Halen replica guitar, if you will. Like, so there you go.
Yeah.
But so now that I have this guitar, we were talking about that one eruption lick. The funny thing is, like, I can't even remember the wrong way to play it now. So we were talking about having to relearn things, and I don't know. I hope I can execute the lick here right now. It's certainly not easy, but it's the part in eruption after that. Goes. And then it has this crazy part, and I'll play it slowly. He goes. That's the lick. And people just played it around here, wrong way, just all these other ways. But that's the way he plays it. He goes. So when you play it at full speed, it's like. Yeah, so that's a fun. Then he goes. So those are, some of the eruption licks and stuff like that.
I was like this.
Yeah, that's a great little lick, man. One other great lick that he taught me, my buddy Alan, taught me it's a Clapton lick. It's straight Clapton. It's from a very specific song called "Standing on Top of the World" that Cream did live, and Clapton just lays into this lick and it just goes on for a long time, repeating this lick, and it's got some kind of an interesting phrasing, but he goes. Sorry. So you're getting these extra notes in there where you're going, but it sounds so fast, and you go. Eddie uses that lick so much. I mean, there are so many times in a solo where he just plays this first thing, and then he just goes, and it always sounded like he was going in like Panama. So the Panama solo goes and it goes like that. But it always sounded for years like I would go, like, basically sounds like it goes, but it's the Clapton lick. He's just going. Oh yeah, there's a little bit of Panama.
And the secret has now been shared.
Yeah, Alan Garber is the guy. He's the man. He's got the offset tunings. He's got all the transcriptions. I'm lucky to know him. Now I've done a lot of things myself. I'm not gonna act like I'm totally incompetent. I have actually, through some of the things that I've learned from him, I've been able to transcribe several pieces of Van Halen stuff that I feel and I've had confirmed basically as unequivocally accurate. It is absolutely accurate. It's the only way as to how he played it and everything. And I bounce that stuff off of him, and he'll come back and go, "Wow, that looks perfect." Except I think your picking pattern is off here. Now that is another thing that we were so big on is picking patterns. I mean, if you're not doing the picking pattern right, it's just not right. I don't know what to say. It's just you have to have the picking pattern right. So like, it's just is he sometimes is Eddie doing hammer-ons? Is he going? Is he picking every other note? Is he rolling the pick back and forth? Breaking it? Or is he, is he picking every single note? It's like, that's really important to me, all the picking direction and all that. There's a lick that he taught me, and I don't even remember what I did with the picking direction before, but it's this lick that goes like that. It's just this perfect thing, but if you just get the picking pattern wrong, it just doesn't have the feel, and then when you're like, whoa, I got the picking pattern right, it just, whatever that thing is that people delight, the internal part of their brains with when the light bulb goes on, and they're like, wow, I got it, that's a really satisfying, fun thing. It's like chasing down a puzzle or something like that. And it's way more of a personal challenge than just learning a song. Like I can just learn a song. I listen to it and figure the chords, and I don't know if it's exactly the way the guitar player played it or what, So it's a lot different than just learning a song. But it's also unique to Eddie because he had a very unique way of playing. He didn't really have a lot of actual musical training. So some of those licks that I played you, the notes are insane. They don't make any sense at all. It's just what happened when he's doing this pattern, and that's where the notes fell. Literally, like he just did wild things sometimes. Like he didn't really know classical scales on the guitar very well, but he came up with this like dummy thing that sounded just like it. And I always loved this when he would do his live solo. He would go. Like it sounds classical or whatever, but it's kind of phony. And he even said so. He's like, yeah, I have this little lick that I use a lot. It sounds classical or whatever. That's just what he would say. It just sounds classical. Yeah, it's cool. So he would like start his guitar solo. His 1984 guitar solo. He goes, he came out and the crowd would get quiet. He goes. All that kind of stuff. So But he just threw those licks in there for fun, you know.
You're doing pretty good, Kevin.
Hey, thanks, man.
But man, you know, I kind of like. I know there's another guitar we can take a look at, and we can, or I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I'll just show you this one more real quick. I'll just
one more, and then I've got kind of I've got one more question after that.
Okay, all right. This is another replica that I made. This is known as the Circles guitar or the Unchained guitar. The reason it's called the Unchained guitar is that it's famously featured in the Oakland Live 1981 Unchained video. What he did with this guitar is he thought that if you made a guitar with a much thicker body and a lot more weight, that it would just have more body, have more tone, be fatter or whatever. So while this guitar is not anywhere near as thick as his actual one was, it's actually heavy. So this is quite a bit heavier guitar. I can't even remember what kind of wood this one exactly is, but it's heavier. So I kind of like wanted to approximate that. And then, you know, it's famous for, he used it tuned down to D a lot. So it's like that. So I just love that. Yeah, that's just the greatest riff. And another thing about that low D stuff, this gave Eddie a chance to really groove like a lot of people had never really heard. Like there's some licks on Fair Warning that are like, you know, it's like real funky stuff, you know. And I really love that aspect about his playing. But yeah, this is just another one of the guitars I wanted to show off. I have several others, you know, but and like you said, maybe another day we can do something that's all about that. But this one and that one, for whatever reason, you make like 12, you know, and then, you know, one doesn't stay in tune very well. Who knows? You put it all together right, you know. One that's noisy. You know, you re-solder it over and over. I don't know what it is. I replaced the output jack. It just doesn't stay in tune. I don't know what it is. It's whatever. And then you have some that you're like, oh man, that feels just right. You know, like, oh yeah. And like, you just go like, still in tune, you know, like they're good, you know, like this one and the 5150 are the ones that I definitely use the most, you know, when I'm just kind of playing around the house playing his stuff. And I also made one of the ones that I think most people associate with him is this classic Frankenstein, you know.
Yeah.
This is like the 1980 version of the Frankenstein, so before it had a floating trim and stuff like that. And it used a piece of a record album for a pick guard. I thought that was pretty fun. But this is a really good one too. But I think a lot of people like this is really the one that they associate with Eddie. And so yes, I definitely have one right down to the 1971 quarter on the body.
Nice. Yes, of course. I mean, for it to be a replica, it needs to have all the details. But as we've learned,
that's the thing. Those message boards and Facebook pages and stuff, you know. Some people can be harsh, you know. They're like, "That's a 1972 quarter on it," you know. Is it? Why don't you just paint it pink, you know? You know, like, I mean, you know, you're like, okay, I'll go get the quarter on it. And then you're like, you put the quarter on, it's like, he had 3 drill holes in it, you know, you're like, okay. You know, I mean, people really go even further than that, you know, like they won't even accept it if it's not a Seymour Duncan 59 pedal from 1978, you know. You bought a 2012, you know, Seymour Duncan. Oh, no way, you know, like, I'm pretty sure the specs are the same, but okay, I got you.
Oh, man, that's too funny. Well, kind of parting thoughts on after you wrote the book or in the process of writing the book. with Eddie. I don't know. This is a kind of a broad question. We're trying to dial it in. Was there an aha moment in his life or a personality or character trait of his that just really stuck with you? Like, let me just leave it at that. Something that
Yeah, I
you
mean,
just was like, oh man.
so it's really a multifaceted idea. I first admired him and worshipped him, starting in like 82 when I was like a 10-year-old boy. What did I like about him when I was 10? It was playing. He stood out. He was a sharp, masterful player. He wasn't just a rocker. He was it was like kind of a Mozart of hard rock. I mean, everybody says that. That's not me saying that. Everybody thought that. And I also loved his personality. A lot of rock guys, metal guys were always scowling and stuff, and Eddie just had that perm smile. How much of it was cocaine, I don't know, but he had that permanent smile. He looked like he was having a blast when he was on stage. And like I said earlier, I mean, I even liked his hairstyle. I liked his clothes. I just wanted to be like him, and he seemed very friendly. He didn't seem like he was intimidating. He seemed like in the interviews he was very much a normal, kind of a normal guy. It seemed like it. If you were looking for that, you could say, oh well, he takes a crap every day like everybody else, or something, or whatever. Or he would say, I had this issue. My car breaks down, or something like that. And you're like, yeah, okay, everybody's car breaks down. I get that. Then as time went on, the transition to Sammy Hagar was jarring for me. Nevertheless, I followed Eddie faithfully, for many years while he was with Sammy Hagar. And I even thought, the 5150 album, I still think is a masterpiece. I really love it. I'm glad that they were able to make that record with Sammy. It's really great. But that quality didn't sustain, it's not really a debate that the quality of Van Halen's original music over time never matched up to that original era, until they did the album with David Lee Roth in 2012, A Different Kind of Truth, which I think is just as good as any of the other original Van Halen albums. So in that case, it's like Van Halen had to be with David Lee Roth for it to be really great, But as an adult, my perspective on him is very different. It's very, very different. As an adult, I admire his originality more than when I was younger. I didn't realize, come on, just to be able to paint a guitar in such a way that everybody's like, I know instantly that's Eddie Van Halen. That's hard to achieve. And I got to ask him a question. That was my question. How did you come up with that? Everybody knows that design, that paint job, that design. And of course, he's just like, there's this piece of tape laying there, so I just put the tape on it, wrapped it around, and I painted it and took the tape off. He made it just like, it's no big deal. I'm like, yeah, but everybody was doing it. It was such a big deal. That originality, and then his where he would play other people's music, but it would sound like a Van Halenized version of it. I loved that. I loved that, how original he was. You couldn't make it sound like. I remember he made some joke that they played Casey and the Sunshine Band or something like that. He goes, but of course, by the time I got done with it, it sounded like Black Sabbath or something. I love that, and then I love, as an adult, I'm really admired his entrepreneurship. Wow, like the guy was always going through all these endorsements and going through Kramer, going through Peavey, and finally he was like found a home with Fender, where they were like, dude, you just make whatever you want to make. And they're like, you know what? We're so happy to have you. We're going to make replicas of your original guitar. We're going to sell them for 25 grand a piece, man. So he really found a home there, and he was able to make his own amps. He was able to make his own guitars. He was able to make his own pedals, and a lot of that stuff is widely adapted. Those are now common products. I mean, you see the Foo Fighters or whatever, and they might have the EVH amps on stage and stuff like that. I saw John Fogerty a couple years ago. He's playing one of Eddie's guitars, man. One of Eddie's the Wolfgang, the Wolfgang, the standard Wolfgang guitar. So that's ubiquitous. That was really admirable. Another thing though that I definitely admired about him was that he was able to overcome his alcohol addiction and other addictions. That's something that I don't think he gets enough credit for. I don't think he liked to talk about it too much because he tried to quit drinking so many times. And it took until his son, was old enough to be very direct with him and say, I don't like it when you do that, and I think that was like as simple as it needed to be. And, when they were touring, when they were first started, Eddie started drinking again. He wasn't supposed to drink, and, he messed up some shows, and there was even something on film that was really bad. Not stuff that you want to watch, but basically it was Wolfgang that lit him up. It was like, man, you can't be doing that. What are you doing that for? I don't like you when you do that. And that was finally what made him stop. So he did it for his kids. I really admired that. Unfortunately, he had already done enough damage to his body that it had already set in motion the cancers and things that the documentary that I was on, the doctor, concluded that his neck and throat cancer was almost and certainly caused by smoking, but also alcohol. The alcohol causes neck and throat cancers. It's just true. So between smoking and alcohol abuse, he kind of did himself in a way, and he never did quit smoking. Even when he quit smoking, he still vaped. He just couldn't stop the nicotine. I get it. I see that in a lot of people, that still smoke. I know people that still smoke. They know damn well that it's one of the worst things you can do for your health. Either they don't care. They're like, fine, I'm only going to live X number of years. I'm certainly not going to deprive myself of life's little enjoyments, and what's the difference does it make if I die of lung cancer at 75 or I get hit by a car at 71, or whatever, I get it, I get it. But it's just a shame because, potentially we all say that, he could still be here, it's 3 years on from his death and we all say he could still be here. But I definitely admired that he finally put the drink down. That's something that I actually struggled with as well. And we talked a little bit about my brother's death, and there's definitely some PTSD and trauma and stuff associated with that I relied on alcohol too much to cope with, and it developed into a case of full-blown alcoholism where I had to get actual treatment. And so I felt like that was a big deal. Once I kind of went through treatment, and I went from being a drunk person to being a sober person, and kind of seeing myself kind of mirror that with Eddie, that really, I felt like I had a little bit more of a right or an authority to talk about that. Because rather than being a drinker going, man, this guy just can't handle his booze, I'm like, I understand alcoholism. You are genetically predisposed. It's like an allergy. You can't have it. It doesn't work with your system. It may feel great for a moment, but it just is doing more damage than you can imagine. And then you hate other people that can drink and not have any problem. You're like, what? Why can't I be like that? You just can't, And I've found myself as my physiology, and I think that Eddie was this way, and I think that everybody is this way to an extent, that I find that drugs, even, not like hard street drugs, but, medicinal drugs, prescription drugs, and even like alcohol and things like that. Like when I go to the dentist or something like that, I find that I either have an incredibly low level of ability to process something or an incredibly high ability. There's like no in between. So like when I went to the dentist one time, they're like numbing my mouth, and I'm like, I can feel everything you're doing. That hurts like crazy. And they're like, we gave you 3 shots. And I'm like, what do you want me to tell you? I can still feel everything you're doing. So the guy's like, okay. So they give me more. And he's like, man, we never give anybody this much. And I'm like, I can still feel basically what you're doing. I don't know what to tell you. So I've always been that way. Alcohol, I'm not a big guy. Man, I could drink as much as like Andre the Giant. So I don't know how I was able to process as much alcohol as I was able to. I shouldn't have been able to, but that didn't help. I just had this tolerance to it, And then like other things, like, I don't know, like I broke my foot and I had hydrocodone or something like that. And I took like a half of one, and I'm like, woo, I'm like, I can't even, it blew me away. I'm like, I can't take that, man. Not even like a half of one. And they're like, take 2 to 3 a day. I was like, what? I mean, what would happen if I took 2 to 3 a day? But anyways, I think that people are like that, like their physiology, their biology, you can't help it. You have to be aware of it. You have to know I could drink myself to death on accident because I won't ever pass out because I can handle tons of alcohol. You have to be aware of that. And I think once Eddie was aware of the real state of his health, and also, of course, the effect on your family and people around you. The other thing, too, that I loved, there's this great picture of Eddie after he went through that last rehab where he finally quit drinking, and he attended a NASCAR race. He had a new haircut, and he was like tan, and he just looked really good. And the caption was like, it looks like Eddie Van Healthy. And I just thought that was great. What a turn from this early 2000s where it was a very dark period for Eddie to the mid 2000s, or 2010s, where he was doing really well.
That's cool.
And then I was able to meet him at this speech that he gave at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. called the speaker series called What It Means to Be an American. And you can look that up. It's the full 1 hour is on YouTube. It's an official document of the Smithsonian Museum. And I was in the second row, sitting right behind Wolfgang and Alex. That was really neat. And we got to meet them. And then we got to write questions down. And then afterwards, we did get to meet him. And I got a picture and a little bit of video with him. That was really special. My son and I both.
That is sweet, man. Wow. Kevin, it's been a wonderfully fascinating conversation and just very insightful.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, man, to say the least, I'm processing here the last minute. I'm trying to wrap it at the same time, and I'm processing what you said. It's been a pure delight, a real treat, and an honor and a privilege on my behalf, man, to have this conversation and listen with you. This has been wonderful.
Great. Sorry, it's the length of 2 podcasts, but we'll see. Maybe you can split it into 2 parts.
We'll split it up and make it into 2. This is great, Kevin. Let me just say thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you bet. My pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed
it. Dude, it's been remarkable. Listen, okay, well, everyone else has been watching and listening. Thank you so much for your time as well. Thanks for listening and watching Kevin and doing a little shredding in the process. You may have, hopefully you also picked up on some proper technique. Alan Garber, if you didn't get it from Kevin.
Absolutely. Look him up.
Look him up. So sweet. Hang on one sec, Kev. We'll say goodbye to everyone. Goodbye, everybody. Kevin, I'll see you in just a second.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Guitar Gavel podcast, and a special thanks to Steve Kuykendall for composing this music and being such the great guy and friend that you are. As a reminder, hit the subscribe button and sign up for our twice weekly newsletter at guitargavel.com.